Okay.
Hey,
I think, Steve, we
we're
should get going.
going to go ahead and get started here. Thank you, everyone, first of all, for joining the Zoom this morning. We really appreciate all of you taking the time to, jump into this and help be part of the solution. We've got over 550 people already on the Zoom right now, which is just an incredible response. Before we go any further, I just wanted to say that, for any of you who have been directly impacted by the fires, we just send our condolences. Our thoughts are with you. This has obviously been a devastating time for our entire community. And, I know a lot of people on this call have been very directly affected. So our thoughts are with you. I think something that has been really inspiring to me and to our whole team over this past week has been the immediate response from several of those people who have been directly affected. Just so quickly turning the page, thinking about the future, and wanting to lead the charge on the rebuild process. It's not easy. I mean, we are just over a week from the beginning of this whole situation, and people have been moving so quickly, wanting to move towards the future in what is a very challenging situation. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that it really is inspiring. We also want to acknowledge all of the first responders that have helped out in incredible ways throughout the past week, and also all of the people from the community of professionals that have been in constant communication amongst themselves and with us to develop a network that can help lead the charge in solving these issues ahead of us, along with the city and the state and federal, who have really quickly been moving to prepare executive orders, top-down leadership regarding the rebuild process, which we will talk through today. I think all of these things happening so quickly gives me a lot of hope for what's to come. And today, I hope that we can provide some helpful information to those of you that have joined the call. I do want to note that this process ahead of us is very much a work in progress. Information is coming out on an almost daily basis. Just yesterday, the governor released a new executive order. And so we are here today to share with you the information that's available at this time. But there are definitely some unknowns still, and we will continue to provide information to the community as we move forward. Now, just to do a little bit of an introduction, Crest Real Estate, we are a land use consulting and permit expediting firm working throughout the greater Los Angeles area. We have been around for almost 15 years, and we love this city. Several of us, are born and raised in this city and have spent our whole professional careers helping to build this city. On the call today, we've got Jason Summers, our president and founder, Thomas Dumary, who is our vice president, Tony Russo, the director of our discretionary entitlements division, Alex Whitehead, the director of our plan check division, and Andrew Odom, one of our special project leads, who has also really just done a deep dive into all of the regulations and updates that have been happening over this past week regarding the fire rebuild process. And my name is Stephen Summers. I'm the CEO over here at Crest. One other thing I did want to mention, and we'll have information on this at the end of the webinar, and also we'll be emailing this out. Crest is setting up a donation matching effort. So we're going to be matching up to $25,000 in donations to Direct Relief's Los Angeles Wildfire Fund, or Wildfire Relief Fund. Direct Relief is an amazing organization that helps in disaster situations, both at the initial onset with medical supplies and clothing, and also for years to come, helping communities through grant programs and other programs to really help the revitalization and rebuild process. One last point of order. This is just something that a number of members of the community had just asked me to mention. we have heard a lot about people being approached by, groups really early on with very lowball offers to acquire properties. Of course, everyone needs to make their own decisions in this process, but I did just want to note that, for those of you that are able, I think, patience is worthwhile in these situations. I know that there are a lot of community groups and governmental groups that are working on creative solutions for financing and otherwise that may be able to help people maintain their properties for the future. It's not precisely my area of expertise, but I did just want to note, because we've been hearing about, kind of automatic callers reaching out to large numbers of people. So we will dive in here. Last thing, actually, today's presentation, the focus is on the city of Los Angeles, which is, primarily the affected area being the Pacific Palisades. We are going to have subsequent presentations for LA County, which will cover Altadena and other areas of the Santa Monica Mountains, as well as the city of Malibu and the city of Pasadena. The city of Los Angeles has just the mayor very quickly released an executive order, which we're going to focus on today, that provides a lot of guidance. So we feel we have the most information about the city of LA, which is why we're starting there today. But there's definitely a lot of other information to go over on subsequent meetings. All right, so today's presentation, we are going to start by talking about the governor's order. Then we are going to dive into Mayor Bass's executive order, followed by rebuild options and talking through sort of what paths are available for people who want to rebuild on their properties. And then we're going to talk through the design and permitting process. So we'll talk about what needs to happen in order to prepare and what we know about the process thus far. And then we will get into a Q&A. As Andrew mentioned and Jason mentioned, we are gathering questions. If you have any, please do enter them into the chat, the Q&A portal, and we will be sifting through those and answering as many as we can at the end of the presentation. All right, so the governor's order. So Governor Newsom issued an order this past Sunday evening, and that order is sort of a top-down set of directives for the state. First, he has suspended the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, reviews, as well as Coastal Act reviews for projects that are in substantially the same location as the previous building, and also do not exceed 110% of the footprint, height, and bulk of the previous building. So essentially, as long as you are not increasing the size and footprint of your building by more than 10%, and are building in the same location as the prior building, you can avoid lengthy and oftentimes costly CEQA and coastal reviews for your projects. And we'll dive back into the 110% discussion with the mayor's order as well. Governor Newsom has also ordered state agencies to review if there are other state codes that should be temporarily suspended that could reduce burdens either due to cost or time on projects. And this is really focused on elements that are not essential to health and safety. So things like stormwater capture and reuse requirements, potentially Title 24 energy efficiency codes, and things along those lines to help improve from a cost perspective. Additionally, something else that the governor is talking about, which I know is on everyone's mind, is creating an incentive program for certain fire hardening measures. So they are looking into whether it's tax rebates or other programs, reduction in fees, to incentivize people to implement measures that will make these communities safer and more resistant to fires in the future. And I know that is critical here for all of this to be successful. The governor is also asking the state to explore the adoption of standardized plans that have been sort of pre-approved for certain more straightforward rectangular parcels, and to look into other permit efficiency methods. I will note the governor's order establishes a goal of issuing permits within 30 days. We would love to see that happen, and perhaps for some standard plans it will be feasible, but it's not realistic for more custom one-off designs. That said, as we'll get to in the city's order, there are several, very major streamlining efforts that the city has already put forth. And then lastly, as of yesterday in the governor's new order, which came in as we were doing our final prep for this presentation, the governor has stated that ADUs will also be exempt from the Coastal Act and CEQA for projects in the coastal zone. This is really a big deal because this gives a lot more flexibility for projects in the coastal zone to do a more significant addition and potentially to add an extra unit without having to go through a lengthy entitlement process. Next, we're going to move into the mayor's order. So the mayor's order, first, it starts by talking about the cleanup process, which I know is top of mind for many of you. The mayor established a debris removal task force that has the goal of unifying the efforts of local, state, and federal agencies to work towards debris removal and kind of stabilization of the area. There are not, I want to be clear, there are not any precise timelines that have been established yet for how long the cleanup process will take. However, we've done some research on similar disaster situations like the Camp Fire up in Paradise and fires that affected Santa Rosa, and also through some discussions with city staff. It seems that the first 1 to 3 months is really the time for damage assessment. And then following damage assessment and potentially concurrently for certain instances, the repair, debris removal, and infrastructure repair and upgrades will occur. I know that in Paradise for the Camp Fire, it was a roughly 9 to 12 month process overall, just to give some sort of frame of reference. However, this is a completely different community, topography, and set of situations in the Palisades. So I would certainly recommend that everyone wait to hear for official guidance from the city regarding what these timelines will look like. I know the city is working overtime, quite literally, to get to the bottom of how this will all map out. Additionally, the mayor has established a watershed hazards task force to assess any risks of flash floods, mudslides, and debris flow. Their goal is to both assess and also mitigate. So they will be putting in some actual implementation in the field for erosion control measures. Next up, the mayor talks about the rebuild process and development services. So first of all, there's a disaster recovery center that will house various key departments, city planning, building and safety, and several others, as well as FEMA for federal relief and requirements. Currently, this center is located at the former West Side Pavilion, which is located at Pico and Westwood, actually quite close to where our office is. The ultimate center, permitting center that they're going to develop, the location is to be determined. They do want it to be fairly close to the area of the disaster, so somewhere close enough to the Palisades, but that's TBD for now. It's at the former West Side Pavilion. And it's really important to note in the mayor's order, she has directed the city to be available 7 days per week for processing these permits for these projects and answering questions, which is, I think, pretty unprecedented for our city and really a good show of faith about how this is going to happen moving forward. Additionally, a development services and building permit task force in charge of streamlining processes and reviewing what processes and roadblocks can be removed has been established. And we're going to be learning a lot more over the next, I would say, 30 to 60 days, maybe 30 to 90 days, about how they're going to alter the process and the requirements to make this as efficient as possible, to allow people to rebuild quickly and as inexpensively as possible. The mayor mandates an expedited permit review process, requiring that all reviews be completed within 30 days following the submission of a complete application. A couple of key points. First of all, this is intended to apply to all reconstruction projects on fire damaged sites. So we're going to talk later about projects which are rebuilds within 110% of the bulk of what was on site previously, and projects that exceed 110%. They'll have different requirements, but ultimately the permitting plan check timeline is still going to be through this expedited review process that will be less than 30 days for your initial review. By way of comparison, a typical plan check, if you're just paying for a regular review, takes roughly 6 to 8 weeks. And if you're paying an extra fee for expedited review on a typical plan check today, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks. So this is on the fastest end of the expedited review, and they're also going to be processing all department reviews at once. So in a typical City of Los Angeles plan check process, building and safety does the first review. Then you receive your plan check corrections, and those corrections list out different departments that you have to go get sign-offs from. The process is going to be altered here for these rebuild projects so that when you submit initially, the plans will be routed to and reviewed by all of the agencies up front, so that with the goal of having all comments within the first 30 days, rather than a sort of lockstep one after the other process. That's going to really meaningfully speed things up. And it's great to see that that level of thought was in the initial mayor's order, which, I mean, again, came out just about a week after everything had gotten started and before really the fires had even been, fully brought under control. Then on the construction side of things, inspections are going to occur within 2 days of a request to keep things moving in the field. And all city departments are going to be processing clearances and utility releases, as well as processing certificates of occupancy within 5 business days for all rebuild projects. That is going to help speed things up dramatically on the back end, as obtaining utility releases can oftentimes take weeks to months for construction projects at the tail end. Bear with me here. All right, so rebuild projects, as I had mentioned, there are going to be different paths depending on the scale of the project. So the mayor's order defines a term which is eligible projects. So an eligible project, which is a project that will ultimately receive waivers of certain requirements or standards, is a project where the structure to be repaired, restored, demolished, or replaced is in substantially the same location as it existed immediately prior to the wildfires, and does not exceed 110% of the floor area, height, and bulk of the structures immediately prior to the wildfire. So very similar to the governor's order. Basically, if you're rebuilding in the same location and not increasing your bulk by more than 10%, your bulk is floor area, height, and massing by more than 10%, then the project would be considered an eligible project. These projects must be for the same use and same unit count as the pre-existing building. So for instance, if you had a 30-unit multifamily building, you can't come back with a 25-unit or a 35-unit multifamily building that has the same massing. You need to maintain the same unit count, and you can't be converting a restaurant to an office or vice versa as part of this process. Additionally, projects must obtain permits within 7 years, and work must be completed within 3 years of building permit issuance. So that gives a lot of flexibility of timeline for people as people are putting together their project teams, financing, etc. So one of the key benefits of being an eligible project, which is within 110%, is that you will be allowed to maintain any existing non-conforming rights. So there are a lot of properties that perhaps were built many years ago under different standards, and they might have existing non-conforming height, they might have existing non-conforming setbacks to the property lines, or other existing non-conforming elements. As long as those were legitimately permitted, and we'll talk about permit records review later in this presentation, those will be allowed to be maintained as part of rebuilding as an eligible or within 110% project. One other thing that's important to note, in April of 2023, the city passed an all-electric buildings ordinance, which required that all new buildings be fully electric with no gas connection. The city has waived that for eligible projects, which means you'll be able to maintain your gas connection. I will note for projects that exceed 110%, if there are any elements of the existing building that remain, and the project is a remodel in addition, the all-electric buildings ordinance only applies to brand new buildings and wouldn't apply in that situation. Another benefit of being an eligible project or a within 110% project is those projects will be exempt from discretionary reviews. So the Pacific Palisades Village Specific Plan and Design Review Board requirements, coastal development permits, and any other discretionary entitlements for these types of projects will be waived if you are an eligible rebuild project. Any haul routes that are required for these projects will be approved ministerially. A haul route, for those of you who are not familiar with that term, is an entitlement, a special approval required from the city when you are removing more than 1,000 cubic yards of dirt from a property. You have to get a special approval from the city. The city is not waiving that process, but they're going to handle it administratively, as opposed to the typical, roughly 12-month process that people need to go through today. I will note that, for these rebuild projects, we don't see where haul routes will really be necessary in most cases, because if you're only expanding by 10%, chances are a haul route's not going to be required. However, one open question, we do not know the answer to this yet, and I'm sure it's probably already in the Q&A a couple times over, is whether or not basements will count towards the 110% calculation. We are working on obtaining the answer. The city is working on determining the answer for that. And if those basements were exempt, thus providing people a little bit more opportunity to expand as part of this process underground in a way that's not visible, we would be able to get the haul route process significantly streamlined, which would be great. A few other notes with respect to the demolition permit requirements. So our understanding is that FEMA and other government agencies are going to be coming in, leading the initial round of cleanup on these lots. But for things that are remaining, demo permits will not be required. Notification to LADBS, however, will be required. We don't have the details on the format or process for that notification. So they're still setting that up. But typically, demo permits take 6 to 8 weeks to obtain. In this case, it would be immediate upon providing notification to the city. Historic resources. There were several historic resources that were impacted, unfortunately, by the fires. And the city is working with the state to determine standards for existing historic structures that do remain, as well as those that are partially damaged and otherwise. As soon as more information on that is clear, we will work to filter that and provide it to the community. Temporary structures. In the meanwhile, while this rebuild is happening, the city has put in place a program to allow RVs, tiny homes, modular structures, mobile homes, and storage units on these sites for up to 3 years, or while a building permit remains active. So for instance, if over the next 2 to 3 years, you have a temporary structure on the property that you are living in, and then you obtain a building permit, while that building permit is active and the work is being completed, the city is allowing people to maintain a temporary unit on the property to have a place to live. The city is also looking at processes to fast track C of O's, certificates of occupancy for multifamily structures. And they're looking at this not just for the Palisades. Really, it seems like, per the mayor's order, this is actually being analyzed citywide in order to increase the available unit count throughout the city to address, all of the displaced individuals and families. Lastly, something that's been, subject of a lot of discussion of late is self-certification. LADBS has been directed to investigate potential elements of projects that can be self-certified by architects. We don't have any details of, what ultimately this will result in, but it is something that the city is looking into, again, to just help streamline the process. The reality here is with the number of projects that need to be reviewed, approved, and built, the city doesn't have existing staff for a situation like this. And so they're trying to find safe ways to reduce the workload that filters to them to allow people to move through this process more quickly. Okay, so we'd covered the mayor's order. Now we're going to take that information and talk through the different pathways towards reconstruction that people have available to them right now. There are really three key pathways that we've identified. First, on the left-hand side is what we're terming rebuild. These are projects that are within 110% of the bulk massing of what was on site previously. I will note, it's important to be aware, you can change the design of the building as part of this process. So if you want to make alterations to floor plans or aesthetics even of the building, but you're okay staying within 110% of the mass of that building, the city is giving you that flexibility. So it's not as if you have to, painstakingly redesign exactly what was there before. You can make upgrades if you want to make upgrades, as long as you're within 110% under that option. Next, in the middle, what we're calling redevelop. This would be a project that exceeds 110% of the bulk or massing. These are projects that will have to comply with local zoning regulations. They won't have the waivers that the rebuild projects will, but they will still be processed through the expedited review that the city is setting up. So there are still significant advantages, and those projects will move much faster than they would today if that same type of project, would be submitted to the city kind of before this disaster occurred. And then the last of the three options are potential standard plan options. Again, we don't have the details on this yet, but I know there are many architects who are very interested in, creating really beautiful standardized plans that could be utilized on multiple lots. And I think really, given the scale of what we're looking at here, this is going to be, it's going to be a combination of all of these that solves it, right? There's really not one solution when we're talking about thousands of properties that need to be rebuilt. And it's going to be up to the individual property owners to consider these options and decide what works best for them. And we're going to talk through some of the pros and cons of each of these at the end of this presentation. All right, so the next part of our presentation is talking through the design process and the approvals process. So sort of where do you go from here is really what we're talking about now. And we're going to have slides on each of these steps, but just to give you kind of the full big picture, step one is going to be all about conducting records review. In order to establish what would be within 110% of the pre-existing project, we need to establish what was actually there. So we're going to talk through how you find permit records, assessor's records, site photos, etc. Step two is zoning code review. What's allowed on the property? What would be the benefits if you wanted to go beyond 110%? Then we will talk about step number three, non-conforming elements. What elements of your project wouldn't be able to be rebuilt if you exceeded 110%? And therefore, what are some of the benefits of staying under 110%? And then we'll talk through the decision tree and the decision-making process, rebuild or redevelop, and then the design process and who you need to hire in order to move forward with this process. And then lastly, we'll talk through the changes to the permitting process depending on whether you are a rebuild within 110% or a redevelop greater than 110% type of project. All right, I'm going to pass the baton here to Andrew Odom, who's going to talk us through the records review process.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Andrew. I'm a project manager here at Crest. So for this first step, and this is something that you can do right now, either as a homeowner or if you're an architect or agent working with a homeowner, and that is gathering up all of the pertinent records for your property. So the really primary records you're going to want to obtain are your LA City building permit records. They will show the permit history of the project. And they will include floor areas, uses, heights, and will often include a plot plan. But just note that because we've already had this question come up a few times, LADBS Building and Safety did not start microfilming building plans for homes until the 1990s. So if your home predates the 1990s, they likely don't have any plans on file, but they do have permits, plot plans, and some rough floor area numbers and other project descriptions. After your LA City permit records, there are your county assessor records. They're also a great resource for your building dimensions and will help prove your home's existence if the permit record is spotty, which we sometimes find with much older homes. And they also won't have older plans on file for you to look at. And just as a note, this is something that we can obviously help point you in the right direction for when doing this research. All right, next slide. So to view your LA City permit records, you can visit ladbs.org/atlas. You'll enter in your address. I recommend searching by address, doing this process once, and then searching by your assessor parcel number, your APN. Oftentimes because in the hillside areas, particularly, we see homes built on across multiple lots, sometimes with some multiple APNs on your project. And then you're going to click permits and C of O in order to view those permits. There will be digital images available for some of those permits, but sometimes there's not, and you're going to need to obtain those in person right now. We haven't heard about any other kind of process. And you'll want to make an appointment for either the downtown or Van Nuys. And then if your house is from the 90s onward, you can see if they do have microfilm of your plans, just in case you want to look at them. You may not be able to obtain them without authorization from the architect who drew those plans or the engineers who worked on those plans. But I highly recommend either speaking with us or with your architect or real estate professional and making an appointment with the records division to see what kind of records that they have on file. Next slide. So for the LA County assessor records, it's a little bit easier. If you own your property in your name and your address is on your driver's license, you can just scan your driver's license and email this email address. Again, all these email addresses, this presentation will be made available after this presentation. And then you're going to want to include your APN number in your email, and then also just make sure to request all records, and they'll send you everything that they have for your property. And then if you're doing this on behalf of a client or there's some different type of ownership structure, just have this authorization of agent or agency substitution filled out and make sure to click the box for office of the assessor, and we'll also provide this documentation. Additionally, this is all based on our knowledge before the wildfire. We expect in the coming weeks that at these disaster relief centers, there will be some sort of, possibly expedited process for this, but we just don't know that at this time. All right, next slide. Photos and historical imagery. This is also going to be really important, especially as you all heard in the mayor's order. They're going to be judging this 110% for the rebuild based on not just your height and floor area, but also bulk and or massing, the more architecturally correct word. And so collecting, photos of your house, photos, historical imagery, there's certain resources that you can look at, either the UCLA archive or LA library to see if there's any historical photos. Just beware though, these photos are likely not going to be enough to prove that portions of your home are legally built. That's really going to be relying on the permit record. But it's going to just be further information for you to prove your project size and what your home looked like beforehand. All right, next slide. The next thing that I think is incredibly important to work on right now is to request and we underline this because this is exactly the language you should use, a new hyperlinked title report with a plotted easement map from a reputable title company. Title reports will clarify whether you have any easements or covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, that apply to your property. You know, if you purchase your property in the last 20 years, you might have that title company contact still for your property. Otherwise, you know, a lot of people within the real estate industry and construction industry work with, you know, reputable title companies. And there's also larger title companies out there in case you need a reference for a title company. You may have to pay for these title reports, but these title reports are, you know, invaluable for the information that they have, especially since, you know, some of you may have lost your homes or need to prove ownership or other documents, and this is a very important document to get. I'm going to pass it off to Stephen because we do have some HOAs in the Palisades. Almost all of the Palisades is under an HOA. And those CC&Rs that have to do with the HOA, it's not necessarily publicly available information. It is information that is on your title report within the CC&Rs.
Yeah, so thank you, Andrew. As he mentioned, one of the things that you can find out from your title report is whether there are any, excuse me, easements that affect your property or covenants, conditions, and restrictions, aka CC&Rs, that apply to the property, which are sort of privately enforceable restrictions or regulations. And one of the key things that you'll find through reviewing CC&Rs is whether there is a homeowners association for your neighborhood. Much of the Pacific Palisades is within various homeowners associations or HOAs, and most of those HOAs are fully active, and they have their own CC&Rs and oftentimes design review boards or architectural committees that have created requirements in terms of setbacks, height, and other design regulations that are different from the city's requirements. The reason this is so critically important to review up front is that the city of Los Angeles does not review for private CC&Rs or HOA requirements. As an example, the Marquez Knolls is a neighborhood in the Palisades that where many of the parcels have CC&Rs that limit the height of homes to single story. If you went to LADBS, the Department of Building and Safety, and submitted plans for a two-story house that complied with the city height regulations, the city would issue you a building permit for that. However, if you then went and started building, your neighbor could essentially take you to court and sue to stop the project because it is not consistent with these privately enforceable recorded CC&Rs. So it is critical for those of you that haven't gone through the construction process before, or those of you here who haven't done a lot of work, especially in the Palisades, where there are so many of these HOAs, that you do this review up front and determine if there is an HOA, and if so, confirm what their regulations are as well. We work very closely with the various HOAs in the Palisades and are happy to help you work through that process and guide you on their regulations and how those regulations compare and contrast to the city. Because essentially what you have to do is we have to analyze which of any regulations are more restrictive for a property between the city and the HOA, and then ultimately the more restrictive of the two will govern. I want to note we've been in contact with several of the homeowners associations in the Palisades already. They've been doing a tremendous job of community organizing and leadership over these past few days. And those efforts have been led oftentimes by people who've lost their own homes. And I know through some of the discussions that I've been having with these HOAs and their leadership, they're considering ways to expedite their review process for projects, possibly through self-certification or other means, because obviously they're just not set up to review such high volume of projects. But they are also looking at, other standards that might need to be implemented specifically with respect to fire hardening, which, is a really critical role that these HOAs can play in the coming years, helping to organize people en masse at creating a more fire resilient, safer community. So I just really applaud the HOAs for the work that they've been doing, and cannot counsel you all strongly enough to review your title reports and consider whether or not you're in an HOA as early as possible in the process. So step number 2 in the design process, after you've done your records and title research, is zoning code review, understanding what are the development parameters for your property in terms of height, setbacks, use, floor area, and grading limits. For those of you that are simply dead set on rebuilding exactly what was there and you've confirmed that it was legally built, this may not be as critical. But for those of you that want to at least consider other options of changing your design, your footprint, or expanding by more than 110%, you'll need to understand what the zoning allows. And it's also important to understand whether or not your property is within the coastal zone. The western and southern portions of the Palisades, or at least much of them, are within the coastal zone, which has its own permitting requirements, as many of you are familiar with, whereas other parts of the Palisades are outside of the coastal zone. And Tony will be speaking later about a little bit more about coastal zone specifics. Additionally, ZEMIS, which I'll just bring up here, is a tool that you all can use to learn a little bit more about the zoning of your property. So ZEMIS is the city's GIS mapping interface, and it includes a lot of data and information about the zoning of your property, as well as any overlays or other key items. We're trying to provide you all with the tools here to the extent possible, of course, within a limited time frame. Absolutely, if anyone has questions, reach out to us, and we will be happy to talk you through the process, the zoning, and for those of you that need it, help put together the parameters for your property. So after you've done your records research, your title research, and your zoning code review, you'll be able to determine what parts of the property or the pre-existing home were non-conforming. Only legally permitted non-conforming elements will be allowed to be rebuilt for eligible projects. So for those within 110% projects. We are expecting that non-conforming elements wouldn't be able to be expanded. So if you have a non-conforming setback, you can rebuild in that area, but we expect that the plus 10% that you're allowed to do would have to, be outside of the setbacks or comply with the zoning regulations. Understanding these non-conforming elements is just really critical in that decision-making process of, do I want to stay within 110% and be able to maintain these non-conforming elements? Or do I want to increase beyond 110% and I'm okay with losing these non-conforming elements, or maybe my property just didn't have any to begin with? Next up, we're going to talk about the coastal zone, and I'm going to pass the baton to Tony Russo.
Hey everyone, my name is Tony Russo. I'm the Director of Discretionary Entitlements here at Crest, and I'm going to just go through the coastal zone very briefly. So what is the coastal zone? I know many of you may know, so I'm just going to try to give a brief context and then just kind of go through the details. So the coastal zones are areas all across the state, up and down the state, that are under the jurisdiction of the California Coastal Commission, and they regulate pretty much all development within that zone, anywhere from single-family home to a big commercial project. So within the coastal zone, and we're particularly focused on single-family home development, but this does go for multifamily or commercial. You typically have to get what's called a coastal development permit, what's called a CDP, and I'll be referring to that acronym later in this slide. So a CDP involves submitting an application to the city of Los Angeles, whereby you have a public hearing, you have a determination whether you comply with the Coastal Act and those provisions of the Coastal Act, and then you have to clear conditions of approval. Depending on what zone you're in, because there are a couple zones within the coastal zone, you may have to also go to the State Coastal Commission, and then I'll go through that in the second slide. So just so you're aware, coastal zone regulates development, and then there are coastal development permits typically within the coastal zone. The mayor's and governor's orders have obviously granted exemptions. So how do you know if you're in the coastal zone? So first things first, you go to that website ZEMIS to determine if you're within the coastal zone. So search your address or APN, and then go to the additional tab on the left-hand side, and you'll see that where the cursor is, coastal zone. If it says none, places like the alphabet streets are not in the coastal zone. If it says none, you are not in the coastal zone. So this slide does not apply to you. But if you are in the coastal zone, which is many areas of the Palisades, then I'm going to describe to you sort of the differences and nuances. So to be really crystal clear here, the governor's orders and the mayor's orders have exempted that CDP process and the corresponding environmental review, also known as CEQA, or California Environmental Quality Act. They have exempted that process for projects that are rebuilding less than 10%. So if you're just rebuilding your home, less than 110%, you are exempted from CDP review. Now, in addition to that, if you are a rebuild project per the governor's order that was released yesterday, you can also add an ADU that complies with both the government code section 65852.2 as well as the city's local or ADU ordinance. So if you're a rebuild project less than 110% and you want to build an ADU as well, you would be exempt from a CDP process as currently written. However, if you're trying to do a larger than 110% remodel and you want to do an ADU, it's still not clear, but that may require a CDP, and we'll get into that in a second. So if you go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there are many different zones within the coastal zone within the Palisades. So there is a unique area called the categorical exclusion area within the Pacific Palisades. This is very unique to the rest of the city and really the state, whereby there is an existing exemption process for single-family dwellings solely. So if you do want to do more than 110%, let's say you want to do 120%, and you are within a categorical exclusion area, you can get an exemption from a coastal development permit or CDP for your single family dwelling. So this is really helpful to understand for those projects who they're in the coastal zone, they're worried about coastal reviews, but they're in a categorical exclusion area. And maybe they want to do a little bit more to their house than they otherwise would have because they're worried about coastal. The categorical exclusion process is a very simple application, and we can share that. It's on the City Planning's website that anyone can fill out fairly routinely and submit your plans, and that can be typically approved within 1 to 2 months. We are kind of reviewing with City Planning if they're going to expedite and kind of create a separate unit for the categorical exclusions reviews in these areas. But currently, you just submit it through the Planning's portal, the online application system. So it is a really important consideration to have. Now, a CADX, what's called categorical exclusion is abbreviated as CADX, is not for accessory structures. So this does get into a little bit of a complication if you're, let's say, trying to do a CADX with a pool or trying to do a CADX with, some other accessory structures. It does add a little bit of a complication. So if you have a unique circumstance like that, please reach out to us and we'll try to provide you with some information. But for the most part, if you are doing a rebuild project under 110%, and you wanted to, let's say, add a new pool, for example, you could get a separate type of exemption called a coastal exemption. It's not shown on the screen here, I do apologize, but it's called a coastal exemption. Very similar process, 1 to 2 months, you submit a simple application, whereby you could theoretically get a new pool under a abbreviated review while you're working on your rebuild project. Now, again, if you're trying to do more, and you're trying to do a lot more, like a pool and a larger house, it can complicate the coastal reviews. So let's say you're not in a categorical exclusion area. Let's say you're trying to do something that does require a CDP. I'm going to discuss the 2 different zones that you really need to be aware of if you are exploring a CDP option. So you're doing more than a rebuild, and you know that you need a coastal development permit. So there's two different zones. The first is a single jurisdiction zone, and the second is a dual jurisdiction zone. You will see on ZMIS whether you are in single or dual. It will tell you. There is also a coastal layer on ZMIS that will show you how much you're in the dual zone if you are. And again, we can go through that. So the single jurisdiction zone means that you just need to get a CDP with the city of Los Angeles. There's a review process where you submit an application, like I said, go to public hearing, get a determination letter, conditions of approval that you need to clear with the city of Los Angeles. There then is an appeal with the State Coastal Commission after that. But if no one appeals you, or if the state doesn't appeal your project, your process is done with the CDP. So it's just a City of LA coastal development permit process. And I'll talk about the timelines in a second. The dual jurisdiction zone means that you go through that city process still. So you essentially do single jurisdiction process. But in addition to that, you also have to get a dual permit with the State Coastal Commission. So essentially you're getting two CDPs, dual, first the city, second the state. It's a very similar process. You submit an application to the state, go to a public hearing, get a determination letter, staff report, and then conditions of approval. And then you have to clear those conditions of approval, and then eventually you can get a permit. Now, the timelines for each of these, single being the city of LA, dual being both the city and the state, it's 14 months for single, 24 months for dual, approximately, right? Depending on project specifics, they can vary wildly. Now, these are the current timelines as of today. As we've mentioned, the city is trying to expedite reviews for really all projects in the area to obviously help rebuild the community. We're not sure if these timelines are going to change or be faster. It's going to be a learning process for all of us. The goal, however, is that the city is going to try to expedite these reviews. So with that, that's a brief primer of the coastal zone and the coastal process. If you do have specific questions, we'll try to get to them. And then if not, you can always reach out to us if this is something that you're really exploring. The goal is that you're going to try to avoid this to help rebuild your home.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, we're going to go to the rebuild or redevelop question, and I'll pass the baton to Jason.
Thank you, brother. So thank you, everybody, for joining this and helping us disseminate this very important information to rebuild the community. And really a huge appreciation to the Crest family for jumping on this right away and putting this together to jump into action quickly along with the city. So when we're going through this process, you're going to be making a decision of rebuilding within the 110% or redeveloping your property because it may be more financially viable to build within the allowable zoning codes of the city of Los Angeles and to maximize the allowances set forth on your property. The current situation, however, is only allowing the expedited review process for projects that are within the 110%. That's going to also allow for non-conforming items on the property to remain, coastal exemption if you are in that area, and also allowing for gas or other non-conforming features to be put back into place. What we're looking to get clarity on from LA Department of Building and Safety and working with people at the state and federal level, we are hoping that a more broad allowance for expedited review and exemptions from jurisdictions such as coastal may be put into place to allow for reasonable redevelopment that exceeds the 110%. All of that is still being crafted and to be determined, but we will be informing you if that is going to be allowed or put into place so that we can hopefully fast track people where you may have a property that would not make sense to rebuild in its current condition plus the 10%. So we understand there are also concerns over, too many large homes being recreated in these areas. However, it also doesn't make financial viability and also to put all the time and effort into rebuilding a home if you are sometimes limited inside parameters that would not make sense and you've gone through this disaster, you need to get that support and effort. And so we will be fighting for that and hopefully get information across to you all very soon. So if you are redeveloping the property, meaning you're going to create a larger home, we do think that the city is going to still do an expedited review on the process. It does give you increased design flexibility, of course, with your architect and the designs for your future family home. You may, however, be subject to more lengthy reviews with the Coastal Commission and a loss of certain non-conforming rights. Additionally, at this time, you would have to be under the new City of LA requirements of no gas for an all-electric build, and all potentially other items that are going to be implemented as we go forward with new codes and standards that are in place. Again, this is all kind of in flux, and hopefully there's going to be favor granted for cost savings, such as still allowing for gas, allowing for an expedited process for the greater than 110% projects. There's additionally a lot of talk going around about standardized plans that can be replicated on many properties. That is certainly something that could be a great idea and help us with a quicker rebuild. There's a lot of prefab discussions in place. We need to get those in line and make sure that they comply, but also maintain the very important Palisades character, right? So hopefully that it's going to, be product that is of a high standard to maintain the character of such a wonderful neighborhood. However, we do need to get this housing back in place as fast as possible. So there's going to be a lot of communication and coordination on how that gets implemented. Going on to the next slide. So there are so many that have lost during this period, and it's quite unfathomable to think of how many properties have been just decimated to the ground. And it's going to be interesting when we all get to go and go through the community to see how terrible it is. And there's so many that have to rebuild. And the unfortunate circumstance of that is there's going to be a lot of people going through this process. And we do think that even though the city is going to do their best to get an expedited review as quickly as possible, they've never seen something in this scale in this time frame before. And so it certainly would be in the best effort or best interest of a property owner to get the process started in the queue in line with the city as soon as possible. So in order to do that, we can certainly assist in helping matchmake for different consultants that are needed on your team. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We have a lot of people that are reaching out saying they're ready and willing to help at discounted rates and do their work as fast as possible for you all. So first and foremost, identifying an architect that you want for your property is going to be the person that really holds your hand along this process and helps you get back in the home. Additionally, we're going to need a survey of the site to plot exact dimensions, topography. We did this morning get some clarification from LADBS supervisors that for very rectilinear flat lots, a survey may not be required, and we can utilize existing online survey information to plot the property. So I would go ahead and get started with your redesigns even before you have the survey, because they may not even be able to access the site. And there's very good online data that can help you, within a margin of error, create the project and get it ready for submittal. Additionally, we're going to need a soils engineer to review the geotechnical. There's a lot of properties that are going to be very similar. So hopefully, there's only so many geotechnical engineers in the industry. Hopefully they're able to communicate with each other and provide reports as fast as possible for people so that they can do their submittals to the city and for them to create their structural design. We're going to need a civil engineer. Civil does the grading, the landform alterations, the dirt movement on a site, and also the drainage. Structural, of course, is going to work hand in hand with the architect to determine how the project is going to be built, and hopefully we can come up with very efficient standards to get that done. Please shut that off. Additionally, a landscape design professional is going to be needed for water use calculations and to make sure that we're putting up non-fire hazard plants and materials. and that's going to be one of the additional required for the project. Hopefully an architect, if you don't have a landscape designer, because there are a lot fewer of those than architects in this city, we can have them kind of get a submittal set in, and the landscape may be able to come in at a second date. We're still determining that with the city. So thank you for taking the time to review this process. We only have one more slide, and then we're going to take question and answers from all of you. You've been doing an incredible job submitting these questions, and thank you to our team for answering them as fast as possible. We're going to open up and be pretty on track for wrapping this up in the next 30. So Stephen, I'm going to hand it back over to you, and let's continue.
Thank you. So just to give a little bit of overview of where we are in this process, as mentioned, a lot of information is still coming out. So we've received the second governor's order. We've received an executive order from the mayor. We're going to get more from both of them, but really the next step is now for the departments below those executives to begin providing directives and instructions based on the top-down orders that have been provided, that are going to give us a lot more detailed information on implementation. And then once that is completed, we will learn more about sort of local policy interpretation and implementation at the counter, right? How are the actual plan checkers and reviewers handling this information in this process? As we get more information, we will share it with the community. So lastly, and again, thank you all for joining us and listening in here. We really appreciate the time that you're all spending on this, and the care that you're all providing on this issue. As a reminder, we are doing $25,000 in donation matching to Direct Relief. So I've included the link here to donate. The donations go specifically to their Los Angeles Wildfire Relief Fund. And if you email a receipt of that donation to Direct Relief Donations at crestrealestate.com, we will be matching up to $25,000. And then next up, we're going to get into the Q&A. Before we do that, I just want to mention, if anyone has questions on a new project, that is a fire rebuild project. First of all, if you have someone at Crest that you typically work with that you reach out to directly, feel free to reach out to that person directly. But if you haven't worked with us before and you just want to start the conversation, you can reach out to rebuild@crestrealestate.com, and we will be directing those to the right person as they come in. All right, let's jump into the Q&A. I know our team. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Stephen. We have received over at this time 165 questions. So we won't be getting to every single question here, but many of them are duplicate questions or on the similar topic. So we're just going to go topic by topic here. And after this, over the next few days, this is the first big question. Are we going to be releasing this recording? And where can people find information regarding this in the future, Stephen?
Yeah, so we are recording this. We will be releasing that recording to the public. We will send it out on the email blast, but also we are creating a landing page on our website that is going to have critical information regarding the fire rebuild process. And we'll have links and ways to download things like this recording, as well as other key documents from government agencies. And lastly, it'll have a way for you to enter in your email address to be provided with updates in the future.
We will also be putting together kind of a Q&A section as well. We have a running list of incredible questions that we are speaking to the city, building and safety executives, planning executives, in order to, help push the process along. Let's see. Our first batch of questions that we received really has to do with the 110% calculation of what constitutes a rebuild. Some of the questions are, does LADBS have a position on what the 110% is yet? What counts towards the 110% floor area? Such as ADUs and basements. And those are, that's the bulk of the 110% questions.
So for now, we have just the language that is in the governor's order, which I've got here on the screen. You all are able to see this order, Andrew, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. So the actual language in the governor's order for eligible projects states that the structure or facility to be repaired, restored, demolished, or replaced does not exceed 110% of the floor area, height, and bulk of the structure or facility existing immediately prior to the wildfire. So this is what we have right now. I think really what we're looking at is volume, and individually, you're not going to be able to increase the height by more than 10%. So if you do have a single story house, you're not going to be able to go to 2 stories, most likely, unless there's further clarification, while being considered an eligible project. Additionally, floor area, right? We're looking at kind of floor area of the building. These are calculations that I think architects will be able to come up with. Really, ultimately, we're looking at volume and height, as well as footprint and location of the building. So if your building's in one corner of the site, you can't move it to the other corner of the site and still consider it an eligible project.
All right. The next batch of questions I want to bring up have to do with soils reports and any, existing infrastructure that has survived on site, such as foundations, piles, tiebacks. Can you talk a little bit about what we've heard from the city on that thus far?
Yeah, so first, regarding soils reports, a typical project oftentimes will require a site-specific soils report. However, in the flats, you can often get a waiver for soils report requirements as long as the project is designed for expansive soils. We are expecting further guidance from the city regarding the types of properties, and ideally, we would like to receive a map of properties where certain types of projects will not require a site-specific soils report as long as as long as they design per certain basic standards. Properties that are up in the hills, I find it hard to believe that individual site soils reports won't be required, just because the topography and the conditions can change so significantly from site to site. But we will see when more information is released. With respect to existing foundations that may remain, we don't have any specific guidance on this yet. Just kind of thinking through it at the moment. I would anticipate that at a minimum, if anything is going to be reutilized, you would need to prove the conditions, meaning if there are pile foundations, you would need to be able to prove how deep they are. You would need to prove the construction method and structural design of those systems. And they may also have to be tested to make sure that they are, still sufficient and have not been impacted by the heat of the fires. So if that is a site-specific condition for you, I think more information is to come, and we'll need to coordinate with the city and also professional engineers.
All right. One of the big, and also to add on that point, we got several questions regarding, will the city allow soils reports to cover, an entire neighborhood or an entire block of homes? That I know that is a question that we have raised with the grading division and the higher ups over at building and safety, but we still haven't received guidance on that yet. The next set of questions that I think is on everyone's mind and that really showed up a lot in our Q&A is there any more information regarding timing? So timing of when people will be able to go back on their site to recover things from their homes, go back on site to do any demolition or to assess what's on there, go back on site to survey, and then lastly, go back on site to start construction.
Ultimately, we don't have the answers to those questions right now. The city, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, is working overtime to figure out how quickly they can open things back up safely, and also what they will need to do in order to make the infrastructure and cleanup project efficient. I could imagine situations where if they're doing large-scale undergrounding of utilities or other work where they need streets to remain clear in order to be unimpeded, they may need to keep certain portions of the Palisades shut for longer periods of time, but we don't have that information yet. If we receive it, we will certainly share it with you. And if anyone receives, definitive factual information on that they are able to share with us, we certainly would appreciate it.
And
On that
I do
note,
want to quickly note,
go ahead.
oh, I do want to quickly
Go ahead,
note
Tony.
that, because I've been getting a lot of these questions from people about, should I sign a longer term lease? How long should I be expecting to, be away from my lot or my home? At least in the Palisades fire, it did take multiple months before construction was able to start. I think when people are truly contemplating how long they should be living elsewhere, I think they should consider longer term leases because it could take some time for the cleanup effort to occur. City of LA is unique. It's different than Paradise. It's different than Santa Rosa. I think the city is trying to pull context from those disasters, but also it's going to have its own unique challenges. So when it comes to timelines, yes, it will take many months, most likely. So if you do want to sign longer term leases, we are recommending that, but we just don't know the specifics.
All right. On that point, just remember this presentation we're having now is dated Friday, January 17th. As of this morning, we were updating our presentation based on the new governor's orders. So there's going to be more and more updates that we will be sending. We will be having additional seminars like this one in the future. Based on the amount of coastal zone questions I received. I also think we're probably going to have a coastal specific presentation sometime in the future. But I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next set of questions that has to do with HOAs. Can you talk a little bit about how CCNRs are enacted? Well, not enacted, enforced. Will it be up to individual homeowners to file litigation? Is the city going to become involved in this? And will the HOAs waive approval or approvals for eligible projects?
We don't have definitive information yet from the HOAs on what their process is going to look like, but I do know, and I've spoken to several of them, they are looking at ways to make the process as efficient as possible. I would not be surprised if they have significantly fast-tracked processes kind of aligned with the city 110% guidelines for projects that are largely, in the same position and massing of the pre-existing structure. There are some HOAs where view preservation is critical, and I think those HOAs are really going to focus on view preservation along with fire hardening, while trying not to get in the way when it comes to the details of design and aesthetics in order to rebuild at scale. In terms of enforcement, typically the way that HOA CCNRs are enforced is through private legal proceedings. So, a neighbor or the HOA themselves potentially suing another neighbor who, is not complying with those regulations. Those are situations we all want to avoid, and they are just completely avoidable because as long as you know what those regulations are up front, you've done your homework, none of these HOAs have regulations in the Palisades or requirements in the Palisades that can't be designed to. And chances are, if you bought a property in one of these HOAs, you did it because you actually like the character of that community, and the HOA guidelines are really designed to maintain that.
All right, the next set of questions are regarding ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So some of the questions include, can you add an ADU during or before the construction of your home to live there while your home is being constructed? Can you install an ADU, a temporary ADU now, retroactively permitting it in the future? Are ADUs allowed to exceed the 110%? And does that include coastal?
So the governor just released an order yesterday, as mentioned, exempting the addition of ADUs from coastal and CEQA requirements. So those are ADUs beyond the 110% in that can be exempted from coastal and CEQA requirements, which is great. It really.
But to be clear, it is for rebuild projects specifically. So they have to qualify under paragraph 1 and 2 of the initial governor's order. which is for rebuild projects. So if you're contemplating a larger project, that, you know, the ADU then may need a CDP. It's still being figured out, but just to make that really clear. And honestly, we should probably do a coastal webinar because there's a lot more nuance to coastal. But
We will be
continue,
scheduling that.
Good. We do not, so the mayor's orders have not been updated yet to reflect information regarding ADUs. Given the governor's order, I would not be surprised to see the mayor follow suit. And I hope that she ultimately does decide to, but that hasn't been released quite yet, given that the mayor's order was just released yesterday. And in terms of ADUs being able to be occupied before the main home, the governor's order, I believe, did include a provision. It was either the governor's order or something in the mayor's order that mentioned that if an ADU is finished first, you could get a certificate of occupancy for it and move in, you know, before the rest of the house is completed, which is typically not the case.
All right, I'm gonna do one more section of questions, and then there's kind of a rapid fire I'm gonna do because there's a few questions in here regarding codes that are a bit easier to answer. But this next section is really about what the rebuild process is going to look like. I know Stephen and Tony, you mentioned we don't really have any idea of timing. We just have examples of what it took in Santa Rosa and in Paradise. But for the rebuild process, there's questions regarding traffic and truck traffic mitigation, storage of materials for construction, and then also just the plan check process. You know, do you think the city will be contracting with consultants to do plan check and inspection? I think that's the bulk of these questions regarding the rebuild process.
I can talk about the construction part, and then Steve, if you want to talk about the permitting part. So in the city of Paradise, they designated a specific area where all the hazardous waste and materials went. It's something that can be viewed on Google Earth. It's a big mountain. So in terms of coordination, especially the cleanup effort, I mean, it's going to be a federal and state cleanup effort. FEMA, Cal OES, and obviously local are going to send out public bids. There's going to be national contractors that come in and work on this cleanup effort. So in terms of coordination with regards to the cleanup, you know, there is going to be some coordination, and there is going to be designated sites for hazardous waste. When it comes to, you know, individual projects and coordination between individual projects, that's going to be obviously handled by the city, and there will need to be plans developed. We have interfaced with the city. They are going to develop more of a comprehensive redevelopment plan. Again, details to follow, to be determined. But if we're just looking at the cleanup effort, you know, unfortunately, there have been these natural disasters in other areas of the state, and they do have a little bit of context as to how to address them. So again, this is pulling context from other areas. Things could be different, things could change. But again, this is just based off previous natural disasters that we've researched. And Steve, if you want to answer the permitting questions.
In terms of permitting, you know, we know that it's going to be streamlined. We know that for within 110% projects, a lot of different regulations and requirements are going to be waived. The exact details of that process remain to be seen, but, you know, I am expecting that we are looking at a, you know, let's call it 2 to 4 month, maybe 2 to 5 month, depending on the project type of process for going through permitting for your project. And really, I think that will apply for less than 110% and greater than 110% projects, as long as those greater than 110% projects aren't ones that require full coastal development permits. And something that I do think is important to note is we have a period of time here where I think people can begin to get organized, prepare their team, put together their project teams, and put plans together that we can get into the city with the goal of trying to actually get permits in hand before the cleanup effort is completed. I think it would be an amazing thing to see if by the time the city has completed, the city, state, et cetera, have completed their cleanup efforts, if there were hundreds, maybe even more, maybe thousands of property owners that are ready to get started with construction right away and just hit the ground running. That is our goal, is to drive towards that outcome. And I think given the timelines that the city's already put forth, I think it's going to be achievable.
All right. So to close out some of the other questions that are on here, there's a few things I want to address.
There's one actually,
For-
Andrew, I want to
Go ahead.
talk about
Yeah,
real
go ahead,
quick
Jason.
that I saw
Yeah.
in. It's about ULA, the
Mm.
tax that's been coming in with the city. There is a lobbying effort ongoing to try and not enforce ULA, which is a 4 or 5.5% tax on those that have been subject to fire loss in this disaster. So more to come. I think it's a very reasonable request. Or let's have that ULA money go towards rebuilding the Palisades. So a diverted effort. But anyways, that's something that I've seen a couple times in the questions and is definitely a hot topic amongst real estate professionals. And we are working hard to get that in place.
All right. So I'm just going to address a few questions that are spoken directly about within the governor and mayor's orders. And then certain things that we just don't have answers on. So debris removal, there's a lot of questions on who's going to be doing this, how this is going to be done. The mayor has been putting together a task force from all the different departments, sanitation, FEMA, to figure out how the hazardous waste removal is going to occur, when it's going to occur. We don't have any answers on that. So just please stay tuned on those items. In terms of, there's a lot of questions on specific codes, such as are solar requirements going to be required, gas items, LID. They're right now, per the mayor's orders and the governor's orders, they're taking a look at what codes should be relaxed in order for eligible projects to be fast tracked in the permit system. So we don't have that answer right now. In a previous slide, we kind of showed where we are with the permit process. We have the governor's orders and we have the mayor's orders. What we are now waiting for, which should be coming in the next 2 weeks per the mayor's orders, is information and direction from all of the departments. So that's going to be building and safety, sanitation, Bureau of Engineering. Even then, we don't expect all the answers to be had, but I know that we're going to be having another one of these Palisades specific presentation that we will hopefully, in the next few weeks, be able to answer some of these more specific questions. And then a lot of questions regarding utilities. Right now, we know that the city and FEMA are doing, along with LADWP and other utilities, doing a large review of all of their infrastructure facilities in the Palisades right now. We've heard that that's going to take, probably a few additional months for them to do this review. And then we should be getting a comprehensive plan put together from the city on exactly what they're going to be doing about utilities, whether they're repairing them or just doing brand new utilities. We just don't have these questions right now, answered right now. With that, I think we'll close the Q&A. Again, we are going to be compiling all these specific questions. Since we started the Q&A, we now have 220 questions that have been asked. So we are going to be compiling those as best as we can into a Q&A section that we will answer and post on the website along with this presentation. I'll pass it back to you, Stephen.
Just in closing, I want to say thank you to everyone who is showing up and trying to be part of the solution here. In a situation like this, there's a lot of difficulty, a lot of sadness, but I also think a lot of hope and positive energy and effort that's being put out there. This situation is going to take more than a village. It's going to take a city, probably a state, probably federal government too, to really solve. We want to be part of the solution. If anyone has questions moving forward, just don't hesitate to reach out to us. If we can help you move forward, we will. And you know, we will be having more of these in the future. So thank you all for coming, and I will be in touch soon.
Thank you, everyone.